She found him in a pool of moonlit frost and darker blood, clutching two bundled babies like they were the only things tethering him to life. He was dying, and his blood-red eyes were fixed on her with predatory intensity. The December cold had been strangling the city for 3 days straight, the kind of bone-deep freeze that turned breath to fog and numbed fingers. Helen Wilson watched the GPS on her cracked phone screen, her van's heater coughing out weak, lukewarm air. 11:47 p.m. She'd been running deliveries since her nursing clinicals ended at 8, her feet aching in worn sneakers, her stomach empty since the protein bar she'd rationed that morning. Saving the other half for tomorrow's breakfast. The app pinged. You have arrived. Deliver to warehouse loading dock. $20 tip. Helen's chest tightened. $20 meant gas money. It meant her student loan payment wouldn't bounce. It meant surviving until Friday. She grabbed the thermal bag. Premium Thai food order, the kind of midnight indulgence only someone with real money would order. The receipt showed $180 for pad Thai and spring rolls that would probably go cold and forgotten. Helen killed the engine. The silence hit wrong. No security lights. No cameras sweeping the lot. Just wind howling through empty loading bays and the distant hum of the expressway. She'd delivered to warehouses before. They always had guards, motion sensors, that constant electric buzz of surveillance. This one felt abandoned.
Dead.
Just drop it and go, she thought. But that $20 tip, Helen stepped into the frigid air. It cut like broken glass. The loading dock stretched ahead, a concrete void swallowed by shadows. The overhead lamp was shattered. The guard booth stood empty, its window dark and hollow. Her boots crunched through ice as she approached. The thermal bag felt heavier with each step. Something in her gut twisted. Nursing school had trained her to trust that instinct, the same instinct that caught failing vitals before monitors alarmed. She was 15 feet from the entrance when she heard it.
Crying.
Not just crying. The desperate, hiccuping wail. Two voices, overlapping in terror. Helen froze. The thermal bag slipped from her hands, hitting the pavement with a dull thud. Hello. Her voice came out small, swallowed by wind and darkness. Is someone there? The crying intensified, raw, abandoned, terrified. Helen's feet moved before her brain could stop them. She rounded the corner of the loading dock, eyes straining against the blackness. Then she saw them. Two infants wrapped in expensive blankets lay on the frozen concrete, partially sheltered by a rusted fire escape. Their faces were red and scrunched with distress, their cries ragged and primal. But it was the man beside them that stole her breath. He was slumped against the brick wall, one pale hand locked around the babies with inhuman strength. Even in the shadows, she could see the dark stains spreading across his chest, too thick for water, too black for ordinary blood. His coat was pristine despite the carnage, tailored and ancient-looking. Silver-white hair fell across a face too beautiful to be human, and intricate markings, not tattoos, something deeper, wound up his exposed throat. A luxury sedan sat 30 feet away, riddled with bullet holes, smoke still rising from beneath the hood. Oh, God. Helen dropped to her knees. The frozen ground bit through her jeans, but she barely felt it. Sir, can you hear me? His eyes opened.
Crimson.
Glowing faintly in the dark. Filled with agony and something that made her heart stop. Not fear for himself, but desperate, feral protection for the crying infants. Run. His voice was barely a whisper, layered with an accent older than any language she recognized. His hand moved, slow and trembling, revealing something that made her blood freeze. Silver bullets. 3 of them, embedded in his chest, smoking faintly against his skin. Run, he rasped again, his eyes blazing brighter. Or I will drain you dry. Helen's hands were already pressing against his wounds before her mind caught up. Arterial blood, if that's what this was, seeping between her fingers. She'd seen enough death in her clinical rotations to know this was fatal. But his skin was ice cold, his breathing impossibly shallow, and those eyes. You need a hospital. The words came automatic, trained. I need to call.
No.
His fingers closed around her wrist with crushing strength. No humans. No authorities. They will kill the children. The babies were screaming now, a sound that clawed at something primal in Helen's chest. She looked at the warehouse doors behind him, barred from the outside. He wasn't hiding here. He was trapped. Her mind flashed to her father bleeding out on cold asphalt while sirens wailed in the distance. To her mother's last breath in a sterile ICU. To all the times she'd been too late, too powerless, too human.
Please.
The word left his lips like a dying prayer. His crimson eyes dimmed.
Please.
They are all I have left. Helen looked at the babies. Looked at this dying creature who held them with everything he had. Looked at the silver bullets and the barred doors and the shattered security booth. Every rational instinct screamed at her to run. But she thought of her father's last words. Don't let them go, Helen. Whatever you do, don't let them go. Helen pulled off her jacket. Tell me what you need. Getting a dying vampire king and 2 screaming infants into her 4th-floor studio was the kind of nightmare Helen would have laughed at yesterday. Today, she half-carried, half-dragged Kairos. He'd whispered his name during the van ride, delirious and fading, up 3 flights of narrow stairs while the babies wailed in their carriers. Her neighbors' doors stayed closed. In this building, people knew better than to investigate strange sounds after midnight. Her apartment was a cruel joke against his presence. Second-hand futons sagging against one wall. Kitchenette barely large enough for a hot plate and mini-fridge. Water-stained ceiling tiles and flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like dying insects. She'd laid him on her only clean sheet, and his silver-white hair spilled across the threadbare fabric like moonlight on garbage. Helen's nursing training kicked in with cold precision. She sterilized her hands with vodka, the cheap kind she couldn't afford to drink, and laid out kitchen knives, tweezers, thread. The silver bullets came out one at a time, smoking faintly as they hit her chipped ceramic plate. Each extraction made him convulse, his fingers gouging marks into her mattress, but he never screamed. Just bit down until his fangs, actual fangs, pierced his own lip. She stitched the wounds with embroidery thread. It was all she had. His flesh knitted faster than it should, supernatural healing fighting against the silver poisoning in his system. The babies were still crying. Helen found the answer in his coat pocket, 3 crystal vials filled with liquid that glowed like captured starlight. Night bloom nectar, the label read in script too elegant for this world. She warmed it carefully, tested the temperature on her wrist like her mother had taught her, and watched as both infants latched onto bottles with desperate hunger. Silence fell, just her breathing and Kairos's shallow, too slow heartbeat. The delivery order was fake. His voice cut through the quiet, stronger now but edged with bitterness. They knew I'd send someone to that location. Knew I'd be desperate enough to use a human delivery service to avoid detection. His crimson eyes fixed on her. You were meant to witness my death. Perhaps become collateral damage. Helen's hands stilled on the bandage she was wrapping around his chest. Who's they? My second in command.
Victor.
The name came out like poison. He orchestrated everything. The hunter ambush, the silver ammunition, the trap. A coordinated strike designed to eliminate me and claim the throne. He tried to sit up, failed, collapsed back with a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. I escaped with the children. Barely. Why do they want you dead? Because I carry the knowledge of the ancient bloodline codes. The keys to every vault, every safe house, every power source in the kingdom. His hand moved to the nearest infant, fingers trembling as they brushed against soft cheek. And because these two are all that remain of the true line, if I fall, they die. If they die, Victor rewrites 1,000 years of law. The baby in his arms made a small sound, and something in Kairos' expression cracked. For a moment, he wasn't an ancient predator. He was just someone terrified of failing the ones who depended on him. I cannot do this alone, he whispered. I am their guardian, their king, and I am not enough. Helen looked at this broken immortal cradling an infant in her shabby studio apartment. Looked at the future she'd imagined. Another shift, another dollar, another day drowning in debt and grief. Then she looked at the second baby, sleeping peacefully for the first time since she'd found them. You're not alone anymore. She settled beside him, close enough to feel the unnatural cold of his skin. We'll figure this out together. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something besides pain and predation in their crimson depths.
Hope.
The last vial of night bloom nectar ran out at 4 a.m. Helen held the empty crystal up to the flickering light, watching the final luminescent drops cling to the glass, and felt her stomach drop. The twins would need to feed again in 3 hours. Maybe less. Kairos was still too weak to move, his body fighting the silver poisoning that turned his veins black beneath pale skin. He'd scrawled an address on the back of a receipt with trembling fingers, an underground market in the warehouse district, the kind of place that didn't exist on any map. A place where Helen's humanity marked her as either prey or profit. The market sprawled beneath an abandoned subway station, accessible only through a maintenance tunnel that smelled of rust and something older, darker. Vendors sold items that made Helen's nursing training feel like children's games. Vials of liquid shadow, bones that hummed with energy, flowers that bloomed in colors that hurt to look at. She kept her head down, Kairos' list clutched in her fist, and tried not to think about the eyes following her movement. She found the night bloom nectar vendor in the back corner. 6 vials. Enough for 3 days if she rationed carefully. The price made her wince. $200 she didn't have, but before she could speak, a hand appeared over her shoulder, placing crisp bills on the counter. Allow me. The woman was devastating. Elegant in the way that came from centuries, not years. Dark hair coiled in an intricate style, wearing a coat that probably cost more than Helen's yearly rent. Her smile was warm, her eyes predatory. You look like someone who could use a kindness, the woman said. Her accent matched Kairos's, ancient and unplaceable. Consider it a gift. Every instinct Helen had screamed danger, but the vendor was already packaging the vials. She took them with numb fingers, mumbled thanks, and fled. She spotted the tail 2 blocks from her building. A figure in shadows, moving too smoothly, too deliberately. Her hands shook as she fumbled with her keys. They knew where she lived. The twins started seizing 20 minutes after she fed them. Their small bodies went rigid, backs arching impossibly, tiny mouths open in silent screams. The nectar in the bottles shimmered wrong, darker than before, with flecks that caught the light like ground glass. Silver particles. And something else, something that made the air taste like burnt copper and rot. Helen's mind went blank, then crystallized into pure focus. She'd seen seizures in her clinical rotations, watched residents handle poisoning cases. This was both and neither, supernatural toxin in infant bodies that weren't entirely human. She worked with surgical precision. For lines fashioned from tubing she'd stolen from the hospital, inserted into tiny veins with hands that refused to shake. Purified water from the bottles she'd been saving for emergencies, run through coffee filters and clean cloth. She crushed activated charcoal tablets. Thank God she'd kept them from her own food poisoning last year, and created a slurry. Kairos dragged himself to the floor beside her, too weak to stand but strong enough to hold one twin still while Helen worked. His voice was steady despite the pain. murmuring something in a language older than civilization, words that made the air shimmer and the poison nectar begin to separate, dark particles settling like sediment. Magic and medicine. Ancient ritual and emergency medicine. Helen filtered and flushed and prayed to gods she didn't believe in. The twins' breathing steadied first. Then color returned to their faces. Then, finally, they opened their eyes, one pair blue as winter sky, one pair crimson like their guardians. Helen collapsed against the wall, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The empty vials lay scattered across her floor, dark sediment coating the bottom like evidence of murder. They poisoned the supply chain, Kyrus said quietly. His hand found hers in the dim light. They knew I'd send someone for more. They're not just hunting me anymore. Helen looked at the twins, now sleeping peacefully in their makeshift cribs. At the 4 lines still taped to their small arms. At the apartment that was no longer safe.
Then we run, she said.
We take them and we run. They left everything behind except the twins and 1 bag of supplies. Helen's been cuffed to life in the pre-dawn darkness, and she drove with no destination, just away. Kyrus sat in the passenger seat, stronger now but still pale, his eyes scanning every shadow, every passing car. They're tracking us, he said after the 3rd identical black sedan appeared in her rearview mirror. The nectar. They must have marked it somehow. Helen's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. Where do we go? Somewhere with history. Somewhere the old laws still hold. He pointed left.
There.
The cathedral. St. Augustine's had been abandoned for a decade, its Gothic spires crumbling against the gray morning sky. Helen pulled into the overgrown parking lot, her tires crunching over broken glass and dead leaves. The building loomed above them, all shattered stained glass and weathered stone, a monument to forgotten faith. They made it halfway up the center aisle before the doors slammed shut behind them. Figures emerged from the shadows. 12 of them, maybe more, dressed in black tactical gear and carrying weapons that gleamed silver in the dim light filtering through broken windows. They moved with military precision, forming a perimeter that left no escape route. Helen clutched the twins closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. Kyrus stepped in front of her, his body tensing despite his wounds. Take the children and run when I tell you, he said quietly. There's a door behind the altar. Don't look back. Kyrus. I have lived 8 centuries, Helen Wilson. This is an acceptable end. His voice carried the weight of finality, of decisions already made. But they deserve a beginning. The hunters closed in. Helen saw the crossbows, the silver-tipped bolts, the expressions of people who'd done this before and would do it again. Then the lead hunter removed his mask. Helen's world tilted sideways. She knew that face, knew those eyes, even hollow and desperate as they were now. Knew the scar above his left eyebrow from the time he'd fallen off his bike at age 7 and she'd held his hand while their mother cleaned the wound. Michael? Her voice broke on his name. You're supposed to be in California. You're supposed to be.
I'm sorry, Helen.
Michael's voice was flat, emptied of everything except exhaustion. They owe my debt.
$72.
This is the only way I can pay it off. His crossbow didn't waver. Give us the vampire and the children. Walk away. Please. Michael, these are babies. They're not human. He said it like he'd been saying it to himself for hours, trying to make it true. The people I owe, they'll kill me if I don't. Kyrus moved like liquid shadow. One moment he was in front of Helen, the next he was behind Michael, one pale hand locked around her brother's throat, using him as a barrier against the other hunters. Lower your weapons, Kyrus commanded, his voice carrying a resonance that made the ancient stones shudder. Or he dies. The hunters hesitated. Michael struggled, choking, his crossbow clattering to the floor. Then Helen saw the hunter behind them, saw the silver stake already in motion, saw the trajectory that would punch through her brother's back and into Kairos' heart. She lunged forward, but she was too slow, too human, too late. The stake struck true. Michael's body jerked, his eyes going wide with shock and pain. Kairos released him, and Michael crumpled, the silver protruding from his chest, blood across the cathedral floor. Helen dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering uselessly over the wound. Medical training screamed at her. Punctured lung, possible heart damage, massive blood loss. But all she could see was her little brother, 7 years old and scraped and crying, holding her hand like she could fix anything. "I'm sorry," Michael whispered, blood on his lips. "Helen, I'm so sorry." The hunters were scattering now, their formation broken. Kairos grabbed Helen and the twins, pulling them toward the altar door as Michael's eyes went glassy and still. "We have to go," Kairos said, his voice gentle but urgent. "Helen, we have to go now." She let him pull her away, the twins crying against her chest, her brother's body growing cold on the cathedral floor behind them. They drove for 2 hours in silence. Helen's hands were still shaking on the wheel, Michael's blood-dried brown beneath her fingernails. The twins had finally exhausted themselves into sleep, their small bodies warm against her side where Kairos had secured them with seatbelts and blankets. "You used him." Her voice came out hollow, scraped raw. "You knew that Hunter would strike. You positioned him exactly where." "Yes." The single word hung in the air between them like a blade. "He was my brother." He was a man who chose his debts over his family. Kairos stared straight ahead, his profile carved from marble in the gray morning light. "He knew what you were protecting. He knew those were infants. He raised his weapon anyway because $70,000 was worth more to him than your life, than their lives, than his own soul." Helen's throat tightened. He was desperate. People make terrible choices when they're desperate.
"Yes."
"They do." Kairos turned to face her, his crimson eyes reflecting in the rearview mirror. "You made a choice too, Helen Wilson. In that warehouse, when every instinct told you to run. In your apartment, when you could have called the authorities. In that cathedral, when you could have handed us over and saved him. You chose differently than your brother. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't make his death." Mathematics. The word cut through her protest like ice. "Your brother's death, tragic as it is, saved 3 lives.
"Meaning?"
Theirs." He gestured to the sleeping twins. "In the mathematics of immortality, in the calculus of survival, some equations balance in blood. This is the world you stepped into when you chose to save us." Helen wanted to scream at him, wanted to pull over and throw him out into the cold and drive until she hit the ocean. Instead, she just drove, tears sliding silently down her face, while Kairos watched the road behind them for pursuit that never came. The safe house was a cabin buried deep in state forest, accessible only by a rutted logging road that scraped the undercarriage of her van. It was small, Spartan, but it had running water and a generator and doors that locked. Kairos carried the twins inside while Helen stood in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold, unable to move forward or back. "He was all the family I had left," she said finally. "I know." Kairos's voice was softer now, the cold mathematics giving way to something that might have been compassion. "And I am sorry for your loss. But I will not apologize for surviving, for ensuring they survive." Helen looked at him then, really looked, at this ancient creature who'd killed without hesitation, who'd spoken of death like arithmetic, who'd clutched 2 infants against his chest while bleeding out in the frost. At the monster, who was also a father. The predator, who was also terrified of failing the ones he loved. She crossed the threshold, closed the door, locked it. "Teach me," she said. "Teach me the mathematics. Teach me how to survive in your world." Kairos studied her face, searching for something. "It will cost you everything you were." "I know." Helen stepped closer, close enough to feel the unnatural cold radiating from his skin. I figured that out when I decided not to let you die. The kiss happened in the space between one breath and the next. Helen didn't know who moved first. Maybe both of them, drawn by grief and adrenaline and something darker, something that had been building since she'd first looked into his crimson eyes and chosen to stay. His hands were gentle despite their strength, cradling her face like she was something precious, something breakable. When they finally pulled apart, Helen realized she was crying again, but this time it felt like release instead of loss. Like choosing a terrible future was somehow easier than drowning in the past. "No going back now," she whispered. Kyrus's thumb brushed away her tears. "No," he agreed. "No going back." Outside, the forest was silent except for wind in the pines. Inside, the twins slept peacefully, unaware that their guardian and their protector had just sealed a bond that would either save them all or destroy everything. The knock came 3 hours later. Not frantic or threatening. Measured. Patient. The sound of someone who had all the time in the world. Kyrus was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between the door and the twins. Helen grabbed the silver blade he'd given her, taken from a dead hunter in the cathedral, and pressed herself against the wall beside the bedroom where the babies slept. "I know you're in there, my love." The voice that drifted through the door was feminine, cultured, tinged with dark amusement. 8 centuries of marriage. "Did you really think I wouldn't find you?" Kyrus went rigid. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Celine." "The same." The door handle turned, the lock breaking like it was made of paper. "Though I hear you've been telling everyone I'm dead." How dramatic. The woman who entered was the one from the market. The elegant stranger who'd paid for the poison nectar. But now Helen saw her clearly, the ancient power in her movements, the predatory grace, the eyes that matched Kyrus's crimson gaze. She wore her beauty like a weapon, and behind her stood 4 guards armed with silver. "Hello, husband." Celine's smile was all teeth. "And this must be your human pet. How quaint. You orchestrated everything." Kyrus's voice was cold, controlled. "Victor was your pawn." Victor was an ambitious fool who thought he deserved power. Celine circled the room slowly, examining the shabby furniture with mock interest. "I merely pointed him in the right direction. The rest, the hunters, the ambush, the poison nectar, that was all me." She stopped in front of the bedroom door.
Now.
"You're going to give me the bloodline codes. All of them. Or I'm going to walk into that room and drain those infants dry while you watch. Touch them, and I will end you." "With what strength?" Celine laughed. "You're barely standing. Your human saved your life, but she can't save theirs. The codes, Kyrus. Or they die screaming. You want to know why I protected them?" Kyrus's voice shifted, became something harder, more dangerous. "Why I risked everything for these children. Sentiment. Weakness. One of them isn't mine." The words fell like stones. "The blue-eyed twin. She's the daughter of Matthias, my lieutenant. He died protecting me from your coup. I took his orphan child as my own because that's what leaders do. That's what family means." Celine's expression flickered, surprise, then rage. "You raised a commoner's blood as heir?" "I raised a child who needed me." The distraction was all Helen needed. She exploded from her hiding spot, silver blade flashing in the dim light. The first guard went down with the blade through his throat. The second lunged, but Helen was already moving. 2 years of self-defense classes and pure adrenaline driving her forward. She fought dirty, desperate, using every trick she'd learned on Chicago's dangerous streets. When the last guard fell, Helen had the blade pressed against Celine's throat. "Don't." Helen's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "Don't kill her, Kyrus. We need her alive." Kyrus looked at his wife with 8 centuries of betrayal in his eyes. "Why?" Evidence. Proof for your counsel that she's the traitor. Helen pressed the blade harder, drawing a thin line of blood. Dead, she's a martyr. Alive, she's our leverage. Celine hissed, but Helen didn't flinch. We take her with us, Helen said, and we end this. The blue-eyed twins started failing an hour before dawn. Helen noticed it first, the pallor spreading across the infant's skin, the breathing becoming shallow and labored. When she peeled back the blanket, she found the wound, a silver graze from the cathedral ambush, so small she'd missed it in the chaos. But silver didn't heal. It festered, spreading poison through tiny veins like liquid death. She needs blood. Kairos' voice was hollow with dread. Vampire blood. It's the only way to purge the silver toxicity. Helen looked at him, at his still healing wounds, the black veins beneath his pale skin. You're too weak. It would kill you. Then she dies. The words broke something in him. Helen watched this ancient king crumble, holding the dying child against his chest like he could will his own strength into her small body. I'll do it. They both turned to Celine, bound with silver chains in the corner. Her crimson eyes gleamed in the darkness. My blood is older, stronger. It will save her. Celine's smile was calculating, predatory. For a price, of course. Name it. Kairos' voice was raw. The truth. Tell your human pet what the council really planned. Celine leaned forward despite the chains burning her skin. Tell her why they want both children dead. Why they've been hunting you across 3 states. Kairos' jaw clenched. The council wants to eliminate Matthias's daughter. They believe mixed bloodlines weaken the throne. They've been trying to enforce purity laws for centuries, but I've always refused. He looked at Helen. If I die, they'll kill her. Claim she's not legitimate heir. Then they'll reshape vampire society into something rigid, brutal, isolated. And you're human, Celine continued, her voice almost gentle, is the only thing that terrifies them more than impure bloodlines. A human who knows our secrets, who's saved the heirs, who's already changed you. She laughed softly. Don't you see? You're not just protecting children. You're protecting the possibility of evolution, of change. And that's why they'll never stop hunting you. Helen looked at the dying infant, then at Celine. Do it. Save her. Celine held out her wrist. Kairos sliced it open with his own blade, and they fed the ancient blood drop by precious drop into the twins' mouth. The transformation was immediate, color flooding back, breathing steadying, the silver-poisoned wound beginning to close. Helen's phone buzzed. A single message from an unknown number, emergency coven gathering.
Dawn.
The old courthouse. Come alone or the treaty dies. She showed it to Kairos. His expression hardened into something that might have been resignation or resolve. They're forcing the confrontation, he said quietly, hoping we're desperate enough to walk into a trap. We are desperate. Helen looked at the now sleeping twins, at Celine watching them with unreadable eyes, at the bloodstains covering every surface of the safe house. And we're out of places to run. Kairos took her hand. Then we don't run. We end this. Together, Helen agreed. Celine smiled from her chains. Now this should be interesting. The vampire stronghold was a converted courthouse from the 1800s, all Gothic arches and gargoyles that weren't entirely decorative. Helen left the twins with Kairos' most trusted ally, an ancient vampire named Lucia, who'd fought beside him for 4 centuries and owed him 3 blood debts. It was the only reason Helen could walk through those massive oak doors without her heart tearing itself apart. They entered the council chamber with Celine in silver chains between them. 12 vampires sat in a semicircle of ornate chairs, the ruling council, each one older than nations, their combined power making the air thick and electric. Helen felt their eyes on her like physical weight, assessing, judging, finding her wanting. You bring a traitor before us in chains. The eldest spoke, a woman whose face was porcelain smooth, but whose eyes held millennia. And a human who knows our secrets. Which should we eliminate first? Selene orchestrated the coup. Kyrus's voice carried through the chamber with absolute authority. She manipulated Victor, poisoned the supply lines, hired human hunters to eliminate the heirs. I have evidence. We don't care. A male council member stood, his movements liquid and predatory. Your wife's ambition is vampire business. Your choice to expose our world to this human is treason. Helen stepped forward before Kyrus could respond. I'm not here as a witness you need to silence. I'm here as the only reason your heirs are still alive. The chamber went silent. Your king was dying in an abandoned warehouse, shot with silver, clutching two infants who would have frozen to death before anyone found them. Helen's voice didn't shake. I saved him. I saved them. I walked into your world, your wars, your betrayals, and I kept them breathing when everyone else wanted them dead. You expect gratitude? The eldest vampire's smile was razor-thin. You expect reward? You're a liability. A human who knows too much. The old code is clear. Eliminate all witnesses. Then you doom yourselves to extinction. Helen pulled a flash drive from her pocket. Evidence Selene had been foolish enough to keep, dates and communications proving the conspiracy. Because I'm not just a witness. I'm proof that your old code is killing you. She approached the council, Kyrus tense beside her, but letting her speak. You're so obsessed with bloodline purity that you murder your own children. So paranoid about human contact that you can't adapt to a world that's changing faster than you can hide. Your queen nearly destroyed your entire ruling line because she knew you'd rather tear yourselves apart than evolve. Helen placed the flash drive on the table. So here's my proposal. Execute me and spend the next century fighting civil wars over who controls the throne. Or accept that maybe, just maybe, a human who saved your heirs has something to offer. And what would you offer? The eldest leaned forward, genuinely curious now. Partnership. Evolution. Helen looked at Kyrus, then back at the council. Your king rules the vampire world with all its traditions, power, and ancient knowledge. I bridge the divide between your world and mine. I help you navigate human systems, protect your interests, find new ways to survive without constant war. You ask us to accept a human as co-ruler? A council member laughed.
Impossible.
Then call it what you want. Helen's voice hardened. Advisor. Liaison. But I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you the alternative. Kyrus moved then, faster than Helen could track. 3 council members fell before anyone could react, silver stakes through their hearts, their bodies crumbling to ash. The chamber erupted in chaos, but Kyrus's voice cut through it like a blade. I have tolerated your obsession with purity, your cowardice, your willingness to murder children for politics. His crimson eyes blazed. But I will not tolerate threats against the woman who saved my heirs.
Who saved me?
Who walked into our darkness and chose to stay. The remaining council members stared at their king, at the ashes of their colleagues, at Helen standing calm in the center of chaos. The eldest vampire studied them both for a long moment. Then, slowly, she inclined her head. Evolution or extinction, she said quietly. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps it's time we chose differently. She looked at the other surviving council members. All in favor of accepting the king's proposal? One by one, hands rose. Helen exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Welcome to immortality, human, the eldest said. Try not to disappoint us. 3 months later, Helen stood in the west tower of the stronghold, watching the city lights flicker against the winter darkness. She wore silk now instead of her old delivery jacket, but she'd kept the jacket hanging in her closet. A reminder of the woman she'd been when she found a dying vampire king in a pool of frost and blood. The twins were asleep in the nursery 2 floors below, watched over by Lucia and 3 other trusted guards. They were thriving now, growing faster than human children, their eyes bright with intelligence that seemed ancient even at 8 months old. The blue-eyed twin, Matthias's daughter, had started reaching for Helen first when she cried. That small gesture meant more than any crown ever could. "Can't sleep?" Kyrus's voice came from the doorway. He moved silently across the stone floor, centuries of practice making him nearly invisible when he wanted to be. "Just thinking." Helen didn't turn from the window. 3 months ago, I was counting change for gas money, eating half a protein bar so I could save the other half for tomorrow, delivering pad thai to abandoned warehouses because I needed a $20 tip. Regret. His tone was carefully neutral.
No.
Helen finally looked at him, this ancient creature who'd become something she didn't have words for. Partner, ally, something deeper than either. That's the strange part. I should regret it. Michael's dead. I'm bound to a world that wants me dead half the time. I've killed people with my own hands. I've watched you kill council members in front of me, without flinching. She touched the scar on her palm where Celine's silver chains had burned her. But I don't regret any of it. Kyrus joined her at the window, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his skin, a cold she'd grown accustomed to, even found comfort in. You found something worth the cost. Purpose. Helen smiled slightly. I spent 2 years in nursing school trying to save people, trying to make up for losing my parents. Spent another year delivering food, drowning in debt, wondering if this was all my life would ever be. She gestured to the stronghold, the city beyond, the vast network of vampire politics and supernatural intrigue she now navigated daily. Then I found you bleeding out in a warehouse, holding 2 babies like they were the only thing keeping you alive. And I realized, sometimes saving one life means changing everything. The council still doesn't fully trust you. Kyrus's voice held a note of concern. There are factions who would prefer the old ways, who see you as a threat to tradition.
Good.
Helen's eyes hardened. Let them see me as a threat. Let them remember that a human delivery girl walked into their world and survived. That I took their queen captive, stood before their council, and demanded they evolve or die. She turned to face him fully. I'm not here to make them comfortable. I'm here to make sure those children grow up in a world that doesn't murder them for not being pure enough. Kyrus studied her face, something like wonder crossing his ancient features. You've changed. So have you. Helen reached up, touching the side of his face, where the silver bullet scars had finally faded. You were willing to die alone in that warehouse. Now you're willing to fight for something different. For them. For this. For you. The words were soft, but they carried the weight of centuries. You walked into darkness to save us. The least I could do was learn to live in the light you brought with you. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent, coating the city in white. Helen thought about Michael, about her parents, about all the lives that had led to this moment. She thought about the twins sleeping peacefully 2 floors below, about the dangerous, immortal world she now called home, about the vampire king whose cold hand was warm in hers. I was a delivery girl, she said quietly. Broke, grieving, drowning in debt. I thought my life was over before it ever really began. And now? Kyrus asked. Helen smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd walked through fire and found themselves forged into something stronger on the other side. Now I'm the Queen of Shadows, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. She leaned into him, and for the first time in 3 months, allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found where she belonged, not in the light where she'd always struggled, but in the darkness where she'd chosen to stay. The twins would wake soon. The council would bring new challenges. Enemies would plot in shadows. But tonight, Helen Wilson stood in a vampire stronghold beside an immortal king and felt something she hadn't felt since her parents died. Home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, drop your favorite scene in the comments, and subscribe. Tomorrow's story is already waiting in the shadows. Thanks for watching.